Alright, so some folks may be wondering how in the videos you see these bikes start up so well. Well, this is a 42-year-old 750, it's an 82 model, and it still starts up great. Well, I was raised, when I was young, on bikes that didn't have electric start. So, like my Kickstarter I put on here just to see if I can make one, this bike starts up so well that I just have to kick her over. Whoop. Starts up fine. So, how in the world do you get one of these bikes to start like that? Same thing for the second gen over here. These bikes, these got the Mikuni carburetors on them, so they start up a lot easier. But just a flick of the button, and away it goes. So how in the world can you get these bikes to start like this? Well, let's go over to the little board over here, and I'm going to give you my recipe for how to make these bikes run, and also show you something that you probably didn't even know was important for keeping the carburetors clean, because like I haven't cleaned these carburetors in 3 years, I'd say, somewhere around there, and they stay clean, and I'll show you the reason why they'll stay clean for me, whereas a lot of people, they might get dirty and you don't even realize why. So let's go over to the little board and we'll look at some of the things it takes to make these bikes start quick. Alright, so here is the recipe that I use on keeping these bikes running good. And like I say, I grew up on bikes that didn't have electric starts, you know, they had Kickstarters. So you had to get good at this stuff or else you spent most of your time trying to kickstart the bike. So you run out of fun, makes for a long day when you can't get one to start when all you want to do is go ride. So at the top of the list, and I just went down through there, and then right at the bottom I'll talk about this one thing that is often overlooked on these carburetors, and it makes a huge difference in how well they start over time. Not necessarily how well they start right after you tune them, but if you want to have them starting good for years and years, this is really important. And for the first gens, it also makes a huge difference if you mess this up down here on these little breathers. You're not going to get any throttle up. Not so bad on the second gens, and Mikunis aren't as sensitive, but the first gens, I'll show you, we'll go back over to the bike once we talk about it, and I'll show you what the effect of having these little guys blocked off does to that motor. So, up at the top, I run iridiums, but it's really important to run good spark plugs on these bikes. You know, this is not a weed eater where you can leave the same old spark plug in there for 10 years and sit out there and pull and finally get your weed eater started. If you want it to start up good, you need to have good plugs. Now I run iridiums because they have a tiny little iridium tip on them, and it focuses the spark, which helps these bikes because their coils aren't very strong in the first place. You know, it's a really old bike, but those iridiums help out a lot to keep that spark really sharp, and so it'll fire most of the time. And if you run the iridiums, they have a resistor in them. You can't buy them without the resistor. It's the BPR7EIX. So the R stands for resistors, so you have to take the resistors out of your boots or get you some wires that don't have resistors in them. Then the next step is, if you don't ride the bike every single day, like I don't ride all of them, I got too many bikes to ride every day, but I put quarter turn shutoffs on right before the carbs, and what that does is allows me to turn the fuel off. The petcocks on the first gens are supposed to block it, and the pump is supposed to block it on the second gens, but they don't do it, they leak. And so if you'll put quarter turn shutoffs right before the carburetors, and we'll look at them on the bike over there, that prevents that fuel from coming down and getting into the bowl and constantly wetting the little seal for the float that blocks the fuel off at the right level, and they'll last forever. Then the next thing I run is non-ethanol fuel if possible. And I don't ride them, like I say, every single day. If you ride them every day, you can probably run the ethanol fuel, but these bikes are old and I don't think ethanol was around when they were made. So running non-ethanol seems to work best for these, keeps the carburetors a lot cleaner. Now as far as the battery goes, these bikes are real sensitive to the voltage that puts out. They won't fire the TCI or the CDI if they don't have enough voltage coming out of the battery. So I keep mine on trickle chargers just to make sure those batteries are up, topped up and fresh. That way when I come out, my battery's not gone down a little bit and then it struggles to start. Then the next one is we need to keep some filters in there. So I put inline fuel filters between the tank on the first gens or the pump and the carbs on the second gen. Those fuel filters help out a lot because the screens in the tanks just really don't catch everything, and you want to try to catch as much of that particulate as possible so it doesn't build up in your carburetors. Now, in talking about the carbs themselves, now there's some videos out on the channel about how to bench sink them and do the final sink. That is really, really important on getting a bike that starts good. Those two carburetors need to be working together, and they need to be helping each other, versus if one of them is more prone to fire than the other on its fuel level, that other cylinder is not going to help out, and you're not going to get that kickover when you start that bike. So bench sinking and final sinking is really important, and you got to have your air fuel mix adjusted properly. So I run them just a tad rich for these air cooled motors. That way I don't worry about overheating my motor if I'm on a hot day, or I'm sitting in traffic and things like that. I run them a little bit rich, but I run iridiums, so it doesn't really matter much because those iridiums will stay clean even if you're a tad rich. But right at the bottom is the thing I want to talk about in this video, is these little breather filters. So these guys, if you look on the carburetor, you'll see these two, and this is a first gen carburetor, so these are Hitachi's, and they got them right here. Well, the second gen has them coming out, and they come into the air pod on the 1100, but they're still there. They're there on both of the carburetors, and these are your upper air breathers. And what they do is supply clean air to the top of the carburetor that goes down to the emulsion tube, and it goes down to the pilot circuit, and then it also is below the diaphragm. So that's where we get into problems. If we're not keeping these guys clean, we start sucking crud down in there, and we'll cut one of these apart and I'll show you that if you want to check your bike and see if they're worthless or not. Here's an example of one. If you take it off there and shake it and you hear it rattling, I don't know if you can hear it in the video or not, but if you hear it rattling, it's pretty much gone. The only thing left in there is the two little screens, and there's no filter left inside of it. So the little thing's basically doing nothing. We'll pull one off and we'll show what it looks like. I'll cut it up and on the lathe and you can see what's inside of this thing. But if they sound like that, they're not any good. Now I only got one good one left. This is a new old stock one that I got, and it doesn't rattle. So we're going to cut it open too, and I'm going to show you what the foam looks like inside, because since we've run out of the ability to get these things, I decided to start making them. So I got me some right here that I can remove right here, and then you can replace the little filter that's inside. So right inside of there, you can take the screens out, take the filter out, put a new one in there, and now I don't have to worry about sucking anything down in my carburetors for these little guys right here, because now I got me some that I can replace the filters out, and then there's the little filters right there and the little screen. So let's go over here to the bike, and I'll point out a few of these right here, and then what I'll do is fire the bike up, and I'll cover my fingers over the top of these breathers right here, and you'll see what happens to this motor. So if you've gone through and you've put little pleated filters on these pipes on these bikes, that may be one of the reasons why you're not throttling up good. Now the second gen, it's not as sensitive to blocking these off. You'll lose your high end acceleration, but on the first gen it'll actually just almost stall the motor. You won't get any acceleration at all. So if you put little filters on these little guys that have any kind of restriction, that's one of the reasons why you can't throttle up on the first gen, and also the reason why I can throttle up so well on that bobber out there with the big old air intakes coming in. So let's go over here and look at the bike and see where some of these are, and then I'll fire up the bobber and we'll see what it does when I block those off. Alright, so over to the bobber, and we'll look at the second gen too. But as you can see right here, I got my quarter turn shutoffs, so that allows me to turn my fuel off and then let the bike idle for a minute and drain the fuel down in the bowl. That way my little needle on my float doesn't always stay wet, and it won't like start expanding or get marks in it that'll prevent it from sealing off. And then also right here is the inline fuel filter that's in between the petcock and the carburetor, and so it's catching anything that's coming out of that tank that those little screens might miss. And of course over on the motor we got the iridiums, and that's about it for what we look like on keeping the carburetor clean, except for those breathers. So same deal over here on the second gen. We got the little quarter turn guy right there. I got a filter up underneath the tank that comes in between the pump right here and up, and it goes over to the carburetor. So there's an inline filter that catches anything that might be coming out of that pump. So it works the same way on the second gen. So now let's go over here and look at these little breathers, and I'll show you what's going on. Alright, so let's have a look at the second gen first because it's easier to see them. And they're right underneath the cover. So I've already got that took loose. But right here is one of those little guys. And then right back there is another one. And these are the two pipes that bring air into the upper side of the carburetors. Now, I'll fire the bike up and you can see when I close it off with my fingers, it doesn't really affect much on the idle on these Mikunis. It really does a lot on the Hitachis, and I can still throttle up, but I'll just lose some top end on this bike if these are blocked off a little bit. But the biggest problem we have is, if you can see right here, there's some spider webs in here that if these little guys aren't filtering anything, if the only thing left is the screen and there's no filter inside, it's going to suck all that stuff in there whenever you throttle the bike up. And even right here, you can see underneath my cover is a dirt dauber's nest, just waiting to get sucked in that pipe right there, go down in my carburetor and stop up my carburetor. So then I'm going to be taking the carburetors back off and cleaning them, all because I don't have any filter material in these little breathers right here. It's going to suck every bit of that down into my carburetor. So let me fire it up and I'll put my fingers over the top of it. And you can see it doesn't affect much on the Mikunis, but it'll affect you when you're hitting high RPMs, because this is where the air comes in to allow the diaphragm to lift up a little bit better. So let's get some fuel turned on. Alright, so if we fire this bike up, you can see it's idling along. Now it's got the filters in there. I don't think these are very good, because based on the age of them, they've probably gone bad, so I'm going to change them out as well. But I throttle up, everything sounds fine. If I cover those two little guys right there, it'll still throttle up. So they don't pull a lot of air. You feel a little bit of air pulling on your fingers. It affects the fuel flow just a little bit, but these carburetors aren't near as sensitive as the Hitachi. So now let's go over here to the first gen, and I'll show you how those sensitive Hitachis really get affected by any kind of restriction that you put in these little guys right here, like putting a bigger filter, a pleated filter, or just shoving something down in the pipes. Alright, so over to the first gen, and now this is where those little filters and how much restriction they have gets really important, because these Hitachi carburetors are super sensitive to the airflow. Now these two, I've disconnected the tubes that go up to the frame, and I put two in there so I can get my fingers on them. So watch this. When I start it up, I'll throttle it up, letting it breathe through the little tubes, and then I'll close it off with my fingers, and you'll hear the motor, it just won't pull up. So this can be a big problem for folks that are struggling with why their carburetors won't lift, the bike won't accelerate, is because if they put something here instead of letting it free flow, then it's keeping your slides from lifting. So let's kick her over. Here it throttles up fine. It's getting a lot of air through these little tubes. Now watch. If I block them off and I throttle it up, nothing. Stalls the bike. What that did, it wouldn't let the slide lift, got too much air, basically leaned the motor out and it stalled. So maybe it's going to be kind of hard to kick this time, but we'll see. See, it's throttling up. That's why it's really important to not have any more restriction on those little breathers than what Yamaha designed them for, because if you block them off, it won't throttle up and it'll just stall the bike. So super important to get those little guys right on their restriction, and also have them so they have the filters in there so it won't be sucking crud in from the little pipe in the back coming right into there. So now let's go back over here to the lathe, and I'm going to cut one open, and we're going to see just what's inside a bad one and what's inside a good one. Alright, so as far as our little filters go, like I say, if you hear them rattle, you hear that one rattle, there's nothing inside of it but the screen. So this one I've already cut open because I had been putting new filter media inside of them and gluing them back together. So I cut this one open, but you can see I took my media out. But inside of there is just two screens. Now if you can see in there, those screens are just nasty rusty because they didn't use stainless steel. They didn't use any kind of good metal on those things, so you can see in there, if I get the light right, you can see it's just covered in rust. Well, every bit of that rust is little by little getting sucked down in there. Plus, if I hold it up to the light, and I get it just right where you can see, from the light, you can see there's nothing in there. So it's not stopping any of that debris like dirt daubers and spiders and everything else from coming in there because the little filter is gone in between the two screens. So, in order to see what their original filter looked like, I'm going to cut open my last good one. And like I say, I'm going to make some now, and I'll just put them on my bikes, and I can put them out on eBay, I guess, if somebody wants some of these things, since you can't find them anymore. But this was the last good one I can find. In fact, I bought two of them. One of them, they're both new old stock. One of them was bad, although it had never been on a bike. But fortunately, this one is still good. So I'm going to cut him open, and we're going to look and see what kind of filter material Yamaha put inside these little fellas. So let's get this little guy zipped open real quick, and then we can have a look and see what it looks like. And there we go. So now, we'll back this guy out, and we can see what was in there. Alright, so if we look at what's inside this little fella, we see that there's the screens just like in the other one. And of course these are clean and brand new because it's never been on a bike. But in between the two screens is supposed to be this filter material. Now, this is a new old stock, but as you can see, this stuff has already started to rot. And so all of that fuzz right there is very quickly going to get sucked down in my carburetor. So this is why I didn't care to cut this one open, because if I'd have put it on the bike once I realized the other one was bad, every bit of that's going to go down in my carburetor, and then it's just going to be the screens, and it's going to let all kinds of dust come through. So basically, if I had swapped it out, I'd have been cleaning my carburetors, because every bit of that would have gone down in my jets. And so there's even more. If we look on the other side, there's even more over here, if I can get that screen out without losing it. So you can see that the screen wasn't super thick. You know, it's not very thick, but this stuff has already started to deteriorate, you know, and a sponge shouldn't do that right there. So as you can see, if I'd have swapped that out on the bike, I'd have had all of that going down in my jets. So I'm really happy I went ahead and just cut it open, even though I paid 30 bucks for the freaking little thing. But I'm glad I did, so then I don't have to clean my carburetor. So there you go. That is one of the reasons why people have trouble. You know, you'll clean your carbs, you'll get everything running good, and you'll be so happy, your bike's running good, and then you'll come out there after about 6 months, and the bike won't start. Or it doesn't start good, or it runs real rough, or, you know, stuff like that. It's because these little things either suck all that crud down in your carburetors and stop them up because they've gone bad, or they've already sucked it down in there on one of the previous cleanings, and now you're just sucking dust in, dirt dauber nests and spiders and everything else down in your carburetors, going straight into your jets and stopping everything up. So that is why, for me, it made a whole lot of sense just to go ahead and make some of these guys. And what I did is made it where I can take them apart. And so every couple years or so, all I'm going to do is just take the little guy apart, take him off the bike, and then inside of here I got my little filters. So all I got to do is pop the filter out, and you can see right there is a nice fresh filter. Now if you're wondering, does it disintegrate like that other one did, I'll put it in my hand, and you can see that I can rub all day on that filter right there, and it's not going to disintegrate because it's a brand new filter. It's not a 40-year-old filter. So that's all it takes to keep all the little cruddies and everything out of those carburetors and keep those things to where they'll fire up really, really good. So, like I say, I got a bunch of them made now, so I can swap them out on my bikes. Don't have to cut them open anymore and try to replace the little filter inside and worry about the crud or rusted up screens. And I can make a few like I did for the other stuff and see if anybody wants them. Well, alrighty. Hope that helps someone, and thanks for watching.